Hello, and welcome to Data for All, a quest for digital autonomy, a podcast in which we bring you closer to the topic of municipal data sovereignty. This season of the podcast revolves around sustainable data solutions for citizens and companies. Looking at situations across Europe, we present facts, approaches, and reflections on how we can better understand and use data for the public good.
Data for All. A quest for digital autonomy. A podcast from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, Schleswig-Holstein.
Hey Aurelie, hey Luke. First of all, a very warm welcome to the Data for All podcast. I am very delighted to welcome you here. Greetings to Belgium.
Hello.
Hi, Max.
So to begin, I have met you guys before, but for our listeners, can you introduce yourselves and tell me what exactly you are working on?
Yes, I'll start maybe. My name is Aurélie van Opbergen. I work for Intercommunale Leidal in the Southwest Flanders region, and I work as a mobility expert for 13 communities in our region.
Hello, I'm Luc Velge. I'm the CEO, the Chief Information Officer of the City of Kortrijk. Yeah, and everything digital data is part of my job.
Beautiful. So today we are talking about the exchange of data in the mobility sector. Data is becoming increasingly important. And this includes the collection of data, the processing of data, and the exchange of data. But first of all, maybe just tell our listeners what data is collected in the mobility sector.
I'll start first maybe. There's a lot of data collected in mobility sector. It's very diverse. We have a lot of countings, the number of cyclists passing by, the number of freight traffic, speed, etc. There are data on safety, accidents, etc. There are various projects that collect data. For example, when you're working on redesigning a neighborhood or a street, data is collected. So it's very diverse, but often also very dispersed. So that makes it quite difficult to have an overview on what data is available and where you can find it.
Yeah, Luke, maybe you can just answer the next question, which is how can the data even be processed? So let's imagine you have collected data for a week. What happens next?
I think data from 1 week is not enough to process a lot. But once we have a lot of data and we have the data for a longer period of time, this is very useful to see what's the impact on mobility through the city. For instance, cycling, the cyclists, where they pass, how many they pass and at a certain moment. And then if we do an alteration or something like that, we can immediately see the impacts of what we are doing.
So how long is the time frame you're talking about? Because you said 1 week is probably not enough. Like, for how much time are we talking about the data collection?
To have the baseline, you need some data for a longer period of time. I would say at least a couple of months to have the baseline and a steady period. And then you can start to try some alterations. And you can see the impact on the baseline you set up, and then you see what happens. Does the alteration we put in place have any impact or not?
Lucas is indeed very correct. You need a lot of data to make good analysis of the effects of certain things you do. But that's often a problem in a lot of municipalities. They have a few sensors they can use to collect data on different points. So I think in practice that it will be like 2 weeks counting on one location and then moving on to the next location. I know that Kortrijk is having a rotation in that system so that they can revisit certain locations every year or every month so that there's a more continuous data stream. But I think that's one of the key problems that you need a lot of sensors also to do that, and that's not that easy to manage. So that's one of the problems.
If I understand it right, you need two things, which is, first of all, you need a lot of time to collect the data. And the second one is you need to be able to do it at the same locations, right?
That's true, but I guess, for example, the fact that you need a lot of time collecting data, it's true, but that might not be the key issue of the project, because we see that, for example, for traffic counts, there is already a lot of data. For example, AWV, which is one of the Flemish departments, they are already collecting data for years on their roads. So there is a lot of data, often historical data, that's already available somewhere, but just not accessible, not reusable. So that's maybe not the key issue.
We'll get back to the interview shortly, but first we want to share some background in the form of this episode's Infobox. The difficulty of accessing existing mobility data is a key topic of discussion. While a lot of data has been available for a long time, for example from authorities or previous projects, it is often difficult to find, inaccessible, or available only in incomplete formats. The EU Open Data Directive is the answer to this problem. A key component is the concept of high-value datasets, data with particular social, economic, or administrative benefits. These include mobility, geodata, statistical, and weather data. Public bodies must make these datasets available free of charge, in machine-readable form, and via standardized interfaces. Their overarching goal is clear: data for all, ensuring free access to decision-relevant data. As discussed in this episode's interview, the EU Open Data Directive is a vital foundation for many local authorities that work with fragmented or selectively collected data. Data such as traffic counts, cycle traffic, car sharing, or accident statistics are also potentially covered by this regulation. Their structured publication will enable data-driven, well-networked mobility planning at the regional level. And with that, let's get back to the interview. Here's Luke.
One of the main things we want to resolve or want to pick up with the proof of concept we are working out is gathering all the data that's available, the data we collect ourselves with sensors, but also the data that's available from a higher level from other governments, to put it all together, even from private companies who do car sharing and that sort of things. And we brought it all together in one big dashboard. So we have a lot of information about mobility in one dashboard, and then we can use it for different kind of business questions, which we can use the dashboard that's available now to see what is the impact of, for instance, adding a place where you can rent a private shared car.
I mean, data exchange is one of the most important and perhaps most delicate issues. On the one hand, you need good data exchange to be able to handle data sensibly at all time. And on the other hand, there's a lot of talk about data exchange in relation to security concerns. So, for example, data policies, we've already talked about this in another episode. So how exactly do you deal with this in the mobility sector with the security concerns?
It all depends, security and security and data, it all depends on which kind of data you are collecting. For instance, some of the data we collect is about the number of cars, the number of cyclists who pass by at certain points. That's not very difficult to pass through the GDPR tests. Other kind of data we can't even use. If I think about ANPR, the number plates recognition, that's some kind of data we can't do a lot with because of the GDPR questions we ran into. So there's a lot of governmental and legal work to be done, so we can really use that kind of data also to make the right decisions. That would be nice for us if we can use that kind of data also in a legal way, Now we don't use it. So we can learn a lot with that data.
Mhm. I might add that there is already a lot of data that's dispersed through several governmental levels. And we can now, at times, exchange this data already, but then you have to sign a data charter for a specific project, and then you exchange a certain amount of data. It's all very ad hoc. That's not really the way we want to continue in the future. I think the idea is that in the future we are going towards a structural approach, a structural data charter between several organizations where it is stated which data is available, which data is exchanged, how we can work with it. So speaking of governance, that's quite a difficult but an important thing to tackle, I guess. Point of view safety is like Luc said, the data we are focusing on now, number of cyclists, etc., is not such a problem, but maybe the technical aspects, data formats, etc., is more of a problem in this case.
Yeah, so let's look specifically at the end user. For example, I want to hire a bike in a city, and later we will get more specific. There is a tourist. I just arrived at the railway station. How exactly does the exchange of mobility data, for example, improve my life as a tourist?
With the data we collected now from the bike renters or rental companies, gives us some insights and where they use the bikes the most, where they lend most of bikes, but also where they leave them. So that gives crucial information about where do we need other stops, where do we need other places where you can leave the bike. That's also for the steps. That's also for the shared cars. That's the same kind of information we are trying to stick together. So we can work the spots in the city where you can step over from bike to step or to a car.
Yes, it's true that when you're looking at the end user, there is already a lot of initiatives that are taken by shared bike providers, shared car providers, etc. I think in the Data for All project, we are focusing on making solutions possible that make life easier for inhabitants, for citizens, through municipal work. Our first focus is to make it easier for policymakers to take the right decisions, to implement shared modes, for example, at the right spots, to take informed decisions on where to intervene in infrastructure to make, for example, cycling more safe, etc. And of course, the results will be directly felt by the inhabitants of the city and the region, but with the proof of concept that we build now, we are targeting policy makers and policy officers from the municipalities directly and not the broad public as such.
I mean, for the preparation for this podcast, I scrolled through Google Maps actually, and have to say that Kortrijk, and I hope I'm pronouncing it okay, it is not just beautiful, but even on Google Maps, you can see a lot of bicycles in the city center. So with only 77,000 inhabitants, Kortrijk is rather small. So Luc, you're working there as the director of digital transformation. What does Kortrijk's path to becoming a data-driven city look like? And maybe you can also briefly explain how this all started.
Well, I think it's knocking down an open door to say that data is the new gold. And we have a lot of data. And I think it's now about 6 years ago, we took the decision to develop the data, to make some information out of the rough data. And now after 5 years, so after 5 or 6 years, we are really getting into the point that we are delivering some dashboards, not only about mobility, but also about some other key figures and key KPIs we are able to establish, which we can show to our decision makers, and which they really can use now in making the right decision. So we are evolving to be a city which takes the decision data-driven. And that's very important. It's like most of the times you can make decisions out of gut feeling, but it's also nice to have a figure, a dashboard, a KPI, which confirms the gut feeling.
I just saw when I looked up Kortrijk that there was an article, and I think it was called the Small Copenhagen or the Small Amsterdam because of the usage of bicycles. And I mean, you can even see it on Google Maps. And Google Maps is just, I mean, if you look around Kiel, you don't see as much bicycles as you see in Kortrijk. So if we think a little bit bigger, you'll probably end up somewhere in Brussels or Amsterdam or Copenhagen, in those big cities, those big cities, those touristic cities, where you have lots and probably millions of bicycles in the streets. So how do you turn such large cities into a data-driven city, and what are the challenges when it comes to those huge cities compared to Kortrijk maybe?
That's a difficult question. I do not work in Copenhagen, so I don't really know the exact difficulties they have. But I think in general it will be almost the same issues. We have to transform the city from a city which was built for cars to a city which is built for bicycles and pedestrians also. That means you have to take some really big decisions about where you can put your car. You best leave it at the city boundaries, and then you take at a hop endpoint. You take a bicycle or you bring your own bike, and then you move on to the city center with the slow transportation media.
I think this difficulty is more or less the same for small and for big cities, as Luc is already stated. It still comes down to you have to make choices, you have to intervene at some point, you have to make decisions on where cars can enter, and that's the same for a small municipality as for a big one. But I can imagine that the number of data you have from Copenhagen will be much bigger than it will be from a small municipality. But it still comes down to the question, how can you use this data to its full extent to make this data-driven decisions? How can you access the data at the right moment to answer these questions? What should we do? Will this have the desired effect? Or to make an evaluation behind the facts to check if the interventions you did are actually working as they should. I think that problem is the same for all kind of municipalities, big and small. The number of data you're talking about will be different, but you need a solution to handle them anyhow.
That's pretty interesting to hear that there's probably not such big differences between those big cities and the smaller ones. It's only the amount of data you're handling. So maybe just the last question. We talked a lot about cities today, about Kortrijk, and now also about the bigger ones. But how can the rural areas, so the countryside, how can those areas be integrated into this process?
Which is very important in the proof of concept and the dashboard we have built, is that it's not only for Kortrijk, it's for the whole city, it's for the whole region of Leedal. This includes 13 cities. Some of them are more rural than others, but we really try to gather all the data from those 13 cities and even from the cities which are just next to them, because mobility doesn't stop at the border of a city. So it's very important to match all those data to see which are the movements, who comes from where, who is moving from one side of the city to the other side, to another city. And it's only when you add all those things together, you are really getting a smarter region.
Yes, as Luc says, mobility doesn't stop at the borders. We have a lot of traffic flows crossing municipal borders, so it's very interesting to see how this evolves. From one part in the region, people are going to the other part for working, for recreation, etc. So it is de facto a regional question to solve this mobility problems, or these mobility issues. But that's not even only for mobility. That's also the case when you're talking about climate or water. There are a lot of topics that are crossing municipal borders and that are in need of regional cooperation and even cooperation with other governmental levels. So mobility was a very good case for our first proof of concept because we have a lot of data on it. It's high on the agenda with policymakers. It's a topic where you can involve a lot of different levels within the government. But I think in the future we will have other topics as well that will need this kind of approach that we tested now. So I think we will be able to make it about climate as well, etc.
Yeah, I think those are pretty good final words, because you guys are totally correct that something like mobility or climate or water doesn't stop at a boundary. So we have to think in corporations, and this is what you already are doing. So thank you very much for this very interesting talk and for delighting us and also me, of course, about the mobility sector. It was pretty fun to talk to you guys.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that was all for this episode. If you'd like to hear more, subscribe to Data for All, a quest for digital autonomy in the podcast app of your choice, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud. And for any questions or suggestions, you can write to us at dataforall@boell-sh.de. The link is in the show notes.
Data for All. A quest for digital autonomy. A podcast from the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, Schleswig-Holstein.